Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featured in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for us, understanding the vital information in those articles from the UPSC point of view. With this, let's take up the important articles featuring in today's newspaper. So the important articles which feature in the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 11th June are on the screens, and we have taken up the important articles for our discussion. Let's move to the first article for our discussion. The first article which appears in the newspaper talks about Russia delivers more efficient nuclear fuel for Kudankulam. Now Kudankulam is a nuclear power plant. Now this is a very important news that has come up in the newspaper from the examination point of view, because the questions from nuclear energy or nuclear fuel, especially the aspect of nuclear fuel, that too in nuclear energy, is repeatedly focused on by the UPSC. Evidence are the previous year questions which have appeared in the paper. Let's take a look at those questions. This is a question which has appeared in the 2020 prelims, and this is a question appeared in the 5th June prelims of 2022. Both these questions are on the fuel of nuclear reactors, right? The question of 2020 reads, in India, why are some of the nuclear reactors kept under IAEA safeguards while others are not? A, some use uranium and others use thorium, right? B, some use imported uranium and others use domestic supplies. C, some are operated by foreign enterprises and others are operated by domestic enterprises, and some are state owned and others are privately owned. We'll discuss the answer of this question, but first we'll understand the components of the question as to they're focusing on the fuel of the nuclear reactors. Similarly, in this year's question as well, the question is asking about monazite sand, or which contains thorium. So again the focus or the spotlight is thrown upon the fuel used in nuclear reactors. So in that context, the news appearing becomes an important anchor for us to look into this concept of nuclear fuels in our nuclear reactors. What is the status and what are the issues surrounding the issue of nuclear fuels, and why is UPSC also wanting to focus upon the nuclear fuels in the nuclear reactors? We'll look at all these concepts. What are the types of fuels used in the nuclear reactors? What is this article talking about as to what is this new version of the fuel that Russia has supplied the Kudankulam power plants? So we'll also look at the Kudankulam power plant and the other nuclear power plants which are there in the country. So let's take up the topics one by one. First of all, talking about the Kudankulam nuclear power plant. It is in the state of Tamil Nadu. It is the largest power station in India, situated in the Kudankulam in the Tirunelveli district of the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu. So this particular nuclear power plant which is being talked in the article is in Tamil Nadu, which is also the largest nuclear power station in India. Now, before we get on with the nuclear fuel and the concept of nuclear fuel, we'll first try to set the backdrop of India's nuclear strategy. So India's nuclear strategy is situated in its nuclear energy program, where in the 1950s, Homi Jahangir Baba, who was also known as the father of atomic energy in India, he pioneered the program for nuclear energy, and consequently Indian government proceeded to explore the possibility of tapping nuclear energy for the purposes of power generation. In this direction, 3-stage nuclear power program was formulated by Homi Baba in the 1950s. So this 3-stage nuclear power program, we'll take a look at that. And consequently, the Atomic Energy Act of 1962 was framed and implemented with the set objectives of using two naturally occurring elements, uranium and thorium, having good potential to be utilized as nuclear fuel in the Indian nuclear power reactors. So the estimated natural deposits of uranium are about 70,000 tons and thorium are about 3,60,000 tons in the country. Now the availability of these two elements start for us the issue of nuclear fuel. So first of all, let's understand what is before the nuclear fuel, and if this was the program, what exactly is nuclear energy. When we talk about nuclear energy, when we are starting with this topic, let's start first by defining what is nuclear energy. So nuclear energy is nothing but the atoms which we see around us. Inside the nucleus there is tremendous energy, and when we split that nucleus of the atom, a lot of energy is released, and that energy, when we harness it, that energy is known as the nuclear energy. So the energy which is situated inside the nucleus, which is released once it is split, is the nuclear energy. So we to garner this form of energy, we need suitable atoms which will the nucleuses of which, if we split, will be able to garner that much energy. So the elements which were considered to be, or which were found out to be suitable for such kind of garnering of energy, came out to be chiefly uranium. Uranium as an element was first found out that if this atom, this element, the nucleus of this atom, if it is split, it releases tremendous amount of energy, and consequently it also gave the Western powers a boost for the nuclear weapon program as well as the nuclear energy program. So uranium is primarily used as a fuel for nuclear reactors. Now uranium in its general form is not the most suitable fuel for the nuclear power reactors, but it's a significant form known as, or isotope known as, uranium-235 is the exact form which is used in the as a fuel in the nuclear power reactors, and this uranium-235 is only 0.6 or 0.7% in the total reserves of uranium in the world. So this particular isotope of uranium, which is the best form of fuel for the nuclear power reactors, is very limited, and the majority of the sources of uranium lie in the Central Asian countries such as Kazakhstan, Russia, US and Canada and Australia. So these countries hold the chief sources of uranium, and that is why India also has to import uranium from them. Now according to the three-stage nuclear power program, Homi Bhabha envisaged that since India does not have much reserves of uranium, India should rely on the other element which can be also used as a fuel in the nuclear power program, which is known as thorium. Now thorium has certain advantages as well as certain challenges. The advantages are that it is not as radioactively harmful as uranium, and it is comparatively safer, and also the energy released is much high for thorium. But the challenges are that for thorium is that the element of thorium does not produce that much energy, so it has to be mixed with a element called, or radioactive element called, plutonium. And when mixed with plutonium, we get a version of uranium 233, which is the other isotope of uranium, which then becomes a viable fuel for the nuclear power reactors. So this became the objective to achieve as a fuel. It is objective. When I say objective, the work on thorium and converting the abundant resources of thorium in the country into the nuclear fuel have not successfully happened yet, and it is still in progress. That is why it is still a objective to be achieved. So we understood that there are chief two sources of fuel for the nuclear power plants. One is uranium, in that also uranium-235 acts as the chief source of fuel, and India, having abundant sources of thorium, wants to make use of thorium as the nuclear fuel, which is still in the development process. So having understood these basics of fuel, let's look at the nuclear reserves, nuclear fuel reserves in India and around the world, as to how it manages the nuclear fuel for its country. So India's domestic uranium reserves are small, and the country is dependent on uranium imports to fuel its nuclear power industry. We saw that, I mentioned this, since early 1990s, Russia has been a major supplier of nuclear fuel to India. This is in consonance with the article where Russia has supplied the new version of nuclear fuel to the Kudankulam nuclear power plant. Then, following a waiver from the Nuclear Suppliers Group, which is a group of countries which regulate trade of nuclear energy, in September 2008, which allowed it to commence international nuclear trade, India has signed bilateral deals on civil nuclear energy technology cooperation with several other countries. So apart from Russia, then we also have signed bilateral deals with other countries such as France, United States. The civil in India-US nuclear deal was quite in focus, the UK, Canada and South Korea. And India has also uranium supply agreements with Russia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Argentina and Namibia. So we have bilateral deals with all these countries, but the chief supplier of the uranium nuclear fuel for us is Russia and Kazakhstan. These two states supply the majority amount of uranium to India. Now, are there any uranium reserves in India? Right, we also saw earlier that there are some amount of resources in India. So the chief source of uranium resources in India are few, wherein we have one in Tumalapalle in the Kadapa district of Andhra Pradesh. Then the Bhima River Basin. You can comment in the comment box below which the Bhima River is a tributary of which river. So the Bhima River also has quite significant deposits of uranium. Then the Nalagonda district and the East Singhbhum district of Jharkhand, West Khasi Hills district of Meghalaya and the Udaipur district of Rajasthan. These are some of the patches where uranium deposits in India are found. So uranium is found in India, but not to a very great extent. But what is greatly found in India are the thorium deposits, where the eastern coast of India is abundant with thorium deposits, and also Kerala, which has the highest thorium deposits. So with this, can we solve the previous year question now? Which appeared in 2022. What did the question ask? The question statement 1 says monazite is a source of rare earths. Now monazite is that sand in which thorium is found. So monazite contains thorium. Alright, then monazite occurs naturally in the entire Indian coastal sands in India. Now can I see a red flag word over here where it says entire Indian coastal sands? So okay, the fourth statement is in India, government bodies only can process or export monazite. Now statement 3, which provided this red flag keyword, is in 3 options. Can we eliminate this option and arrive at the right answer? So the right answer becomes option B, which has option 1, 2 and 4 as correct statements. So this gives us the right answer, understanding the concept of the nuclear fuel. With respect to this question, what is the right answer for this question? When we ask in India, why are some of the nuclear reactors kept under IAEA, or this is an agency known as International Atomic Energy Agency. So IAEA safeguards while others are not. The correct answer to this is that some use imported uranium and others use domestic supplies. So the International Atomic Energy is the agency which has the task and obligation of scrutinizing those reactors which use international uranium, so that they review that this uranium is used only for civil power generation and not weapons generation. That is why those reactors which use imported uranium come under the IAEA safeguards, and those which do not have to come under the safeguards. So that's why the answer to this question becomes B. All right. Now, having understood the concept of nuclear fuel and the basics of it, let's take a quick look at the 3-stage program which is the part of India's nuclear energy policy. Now, what was this 3-stage program? This 3-stage program pertains to the nuclear power reactor, where Homi Bhabha proposed 3 stages of the nuclear reactor which we should go into. So the first stage which he proposed was that the reactor should be the pressurized heavy water reactor, right, which uses natural uranium oxide as fuel matrix. So we can see that in the stage 1 the fuel which is there is uranium, wherein since we are not yet extracting thorium fully efficiently, the first stage has uranium as the fuel, and it will use boiling water reactors based on imported technology. So that is why the Kudankulam nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu is built with the assistance of Russia, right. Then in the second stage of nuclear program, the reactor which should be used is the fast breeder reactor, which envisages the use of plutonium obtained from the first stage reactor operation as the fuel core. So plutonium as a fuel should be used in fast breeder reactors. And the third stage, so currently majority of the nuclear power plants in India are working on stage 1 or stage 2 and not yet reached stage 3, which uses the uranium 233 fuel, which we saw was obtained from mixing thorium with plutonium. So for this we need to extract the thorium deposits and convert it into the uranium 233 fuel, which is the third phase of the India's nuclear power generation program, right. So these are some of the basics with respect to the 3-stage nuclear reactor. Now let's come to the substance of the article, what this article says is that for the nuclear reactor in the Kudankulam nuclear power plant, Russia has supplied the new version of its uranium fuel known as the TVS-2M fuel. Now this name is nothing but the name given for the new uranium based fuel for the nuclear power plant. Now what is this fuel? This fuel is a better version of what Russia was supplying the nuclear power plant earlier. In what ways? This previous fuel had a span of 12 months, which means that once you put the battery type version of this fuel in the nuclear reactor, it had to be stopped after every 12 months and renewed after 12 months. So this renewed fuel has a span of 18 months, wherein it will be able to run for 18 months. Apart from that, the Russian organization states certain advantages of the fuel, where it says that because of the welded frame, this talks about the makeup of the fuel batteries, the fuel assemblies in the reactor core retain their geometry, and the spacer grids protect fuel rod cladding from fretting wear or preventing from depressurization, and the additional spacer grid makes fuel assemblies more vibration resistant. This technical language can simply mean that the new fuel storage capacities are more robust, and the new fuel has increased uranium capacity. So the new fuel also has increased uranium capacity and contains 7.6% more fuel material as compared to the UTVS or the previous fuel. Then another special feature of the new fuel that is being supplied is the new generation anti-debris filter, or which is also called as ADF2. efficiently protecting the fuel assemblies which we saw in the first point. So it also has a anti-debris filter. Then operation in longer fuel cycles, as we saw, the fuel cycle is longer in the newer fuel. So if the fuel cycle is longer, it also saves a lot of fuel. It enhances the economic efficiency of a plant, as reactors have to undergo stoppage and refueling less frequently because of the longer cycle. So the power units produce more electricity, right? So therefore it increases efficiency. Also the power plant needs to purchase less fresh fuel because the efficiency of the cycle has increased, and as the result has to deal with smaller amounts of spent nuclear fuel. The spent nuclear fuel is the residue which is remaining after the usage of the fuel of in the nuclear power plant, which also requires expenses. So these are broadly the advantage which the Russian corporation states about the new fuel. So we understood the basics of nuclear fuel, certain points around it, and what the article is saying about the Kudankulam nuclear power plant of Tamil Nadu. With this, let's also take a look at what are the other existing nuclear power plants of the country. So those which are operating are on your screen, where we have Narora, Kovada, Kalpakam, which is also in Tamil Nadu, Kudankulam, which we just saw, Kaiga, Jaitapur, Mumbai, Tarapur, Kakrapar, Mithivirdi in Rajasthan, Mahi Banswara, Bhimpur and Gorakhpur. These are the operating and new power plants, and those which are planned are so total 22 nuclear power plants have been envisaged, out of which these are working and others are yet to be constructed or under construction or in the planning process. So this was our discussion with respect to the nuclear fuel aspect and the nuclear power plant aspect of nuclear energy. With this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears on the screen talks about former CAG or the Comptroller and Auditor General of India pushing for more accountability in government. Now we know that the CAG forms an important part of the polity syllabus, where we have to study the appointment to various constitutional posts, powers and functions and responsibilities of various constitutional bodies. So that is why studying CAG becomes very important, and the questions for CAG also are regularly featured in the mains paper as well as prelims paper as well. So let's look at the points which are important and the important provisions with respect to the CAG, and what are the issues that the former CAG has flagged in the article, and what is the solution that he is proposing. So first of all, about the CAG, the Constitution of India under Article 148 provides for an independent office of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, or what we call the CAG. So that is why it's a constitutional body provided under Article 148. And what is the function of this body? He is the head of the Indian Audit and Account Department and chief guardian of the public purse, which means that whatever expenses the government or executive does, he is the chief guardian of that public purse. It is the institution through which the accountability of the government and other public authorities, or all those who spend public funds to parliament and state legislatures and through them to the people, is ensured. So he stands as a very important functionary to keep a watch on the expenses made by the executive and all those who make or spend the public money, and see to it that this money is spent properly and is properly accounted for. So currently GC Murmu is the incumbent CAG of India, and the article features the former CAG, who is Rajiv Maharishi. Now with respect to the British Comptroller and Auditor General of India, it's an interesting point to note that the word comptroller is mentioned and under the name, but the function of Comptroller is not performed by India's CAG. So what does this mean? That the CAG of India only performs the role of an Auditor General, which means that after an authority has spent the money, CAG can go and look at the accounts of that spending as to how that is being done. But the function of Comptroller means that before you spend that money, you have to take permission from the Comptroller for spending. So that is the role which has not been assigned to CAG, but has been assigned in the case of the British counterpart, but in Britain it has the power of both Comptroller as well as Auditor General, right? So in India the CAG audits the accounts after the expenditure, which is called ex post facto, and in UK no money can be drawn from the public exchequer without the approval of CAG, right? And in India CAG is not a member of the parliament. So this is an important point. While in Britain CAG is a member of House of the Commons. So this was a comparison with the British Comptroller and Auditor General. Let's look at some of the constitutional provisions of CAG, wherein the important points regarding appointment, conditions of service, duties and powers and the functions are mentioned at Article 148, which we saw, which provides for the appointment of CAG, 149 which deals with duties and powers, and 150 which says that the accounts of the union and states shall be kept in such form as the President may, on the advice of the CAG, prescribe. So the President decides on the advice of CAG the form in which the account should be kept, and Article 51 says that the reports which the CAG will be preparing via all this reviewing should be submitted to the President, who will then cause them to be laid before each house of the parliament. Since parliament is the representation of the people, it should be kept in front of the parliament to see the expenditure reports. And Article 279 talks about calculation of net proceeds being ascertained and certified by the CAG of India, whose certificate is final. So his power is also there for net proceeds. And according to the 6th schedule, with respect to any accounts of the district council or regional council, also can be kept in such form as the CAG with the approval of President prescribe. So with respect to the district council under 6th schedule as well, the CAG has powers. Now, according to his appointment, who appoints the CAG? So we know that the CAG is appointed by the President by a warrant under his hand and seal. So the appointment is done by the President, and the term which he holds office for is a period of 6 years or the age of 65 years. So whichever is earlier, and the CAG won't be eligible for, once he has taken the office of CAG, he won't be eligible for any other office under the government of India, and he can resign any time from the office by addressing the resignation letter to the President. And the removal process has been kept very tricky to ensure the independence of the Comptroller and Auditor General, wherein he can only be removed by the President on some same grounds and in the same manner as the judge of a Supreme Court. So the procedure has been kept that way to keep the independence of CAG intact, right? Then what are the functions and powers of CAG? So as we saw that he is the reviewer of the public exchequer, so he has to audit the accounts related to all expenditure from the consolidated fund of India, consolidated fund of each state and UTs having a legislative assembly. Apart from that, auditing all expenditure with the contingency fund of India and public account of India as well, with that of each state as well. And then he audits all the trading, manufacturing, profit and loss accounts and balance sheets and other subsidiary accounts kept by any department of the central government and state governments as well. So not just for the funds mandated in the constitution for center and state as well. He audits for the central government as well as state government bodies and departments, and also all bodies and authorities substantially financed from the central or state revenues. So even the bodies financed by state and center, the companies or the PSUs which we also call, and other corporations and bodies when so required by related laws. So the purview of reviewing what bodies can be audited by the CAG is quite large, and also he can review the audits accounts of local bodies when requested by the president, and he also advises the president with regard to prescription in the form of which the accounts of the center and states shall be kept. Apart from that, after having audited all of these accounts, he has to submit his audit reports relating to the accounts of the center to the president, who shall in turn place them before the houses of parliament. This is something we saw, and he submits his audit reports relating to the accounts of a state to the governor, who shall then place them before the state legislature. And then CAG also acts as a guide, friend and philosopher of the Public Accounts Committee of the Parliament. So it also aids the Public Accounts Committee of the Parliament. So these were some of the functions and duties. Now what are the issues which the former CAG highlights in this article, where the CAG, speaking in a conference of digitizing the documents, speaks about the ills and evils which the office of CAG is facing, and he points out that the CAG does not even meet the standards of even chartered accountants of private companies when it comes to the assurances. So assurances is a certain service based on talking on which CAG is flagging that the performance of CAG does not even match the private chartered accountants. So what are assurances? Assurances are nothing but review system. The services can include a review of any financial document or transaction, such as a loan, contract or financial website. This review certifies the correctness and validity of the item being reviewed by the CA. So when we say review of any of these instruments, this review is important so that better information can be taken out by the expert, which aids in better decision making. So therefore assurance services are very important, and those on the front of those services the CAG is saying that the performance is not at par. Apart from that, he flags the issue that the CAG officials get to see only those documents which that department wants them to see. So selective devolution of documents to the auditor officials, it happens when they go on to audit that department, which will obviously hinder the efficient auditing of the particular department. So that is one issue. Then the CAG officials are under pressure of time. They are always under pressure of time, and the officers often say that the file is lost. So we can say this issue is about non-cooperation of the department and officers with the auditor officials of the CAG office. And due to this lack of proper data which is not received to the office, Parliament then cannot function its function of oversight over the executive properly. So one lacuna leads to the inefficient system of the other, where if the data is not devolved correctly, the report won't be prepared correctly, and if the report won't be prepared correctly, the Parliament also won't be able to perform its function properly. So these are some of the issues with which the former CAG points out, and it becomes important for us for further point of view for writing answers, because these are those issues which are pointed out by the former CAG himself. So we can note these down and produce them in our answers in the case of if any question is asked. What are some of the other issues which the former CAG does not mention but are also there? One is about the appointment of CAG. What is the issue with appointment? Now the president appoints, but there is no criteria laid down, a specific criteria in the constitution as to how the CAG can be appointed. That is why no laid down criteria, which creates conflict of interest, which means that there is a tendency that the executive can appoint a pliable person in this position, which is a big position, to to hold the executive accountable. That is why the issues with accountability also arise, where if such kind of appointments are done, accountability will get hindered. So that is why appointment of the CAG also becomes a big issue. Now in the article, what is the solution then which the former CAG points out is that not just digitization of the documents which will help transparency of the data better, but also business process re-engineering should be done. Now what does he mean by business process re-engineering? This can mean about the overhauling of the process of working of the office of CAG, where the officers under the office of CAG have more power and they are more the reforms are made for their efficient working. So let's look at some of the reforms which can be made to the office of CAG. First of all, ensuring independence, where we talked about the independence about the CAG. Most countries have enacted laws putting in certain qualifications and also the process of appointment of the head of their supreme audit institution. So if we point out qualification criteria, it also brings independence to the office so that he works independently and is not under the influence of executive, whose performance he is required to evaluate and provide audit opinion on achievement of the objectives. Then also transparency in appointment is very important. To bring about transparency and objectivity in the selection process of CAG, an institutional mechanism needs to be put in place where this conflict of interest in the appointment does not happen and transparency is kept, and the delays should be curbed, which we were talking about as the issue which the former CAG flagged out, where there are delays in terms of supplying documents to the auditor officials, as well as the delays which happen where the office of CAG does not file the reports to the office of president on time. So all of these delays should be curbed, where the officers should be provided access to records on priority basis within 7 days, failing which heads of departments should be required to explain the circumstances that caused the delay. So the delays on both sides, on the sides of the officials as well as the auditor officials, should be taken care of. So this was the discussion on the office of CAG, which the former CAG flagged some issues and we took it up to discuss this issue holistically. With this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper talks about an institution called as NatGrid, where tenure of NatGrid CEO curtailed, right? So what is NatGrid? NatGrid is the National Intelligence Grid. This is a new organization formed for the cooperation in the counter-terrorism and security purposes, and that is why it forms a part of GS2 as well, where we study about the body, and GS3 as well, where we study about cyber security or internal security. Right? So it becomes important from both perspectives. Let's take a look at few important pointers about NatGrid. What is it? It is an intelligence sharing network that collates data from the standalone databases of the various agencies and ministries of the Indian government and functions under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So this becomes an important point. First of all, what is it? It is an intelligence sharing network. When we call it intelligence grid, basically what it is going to do is it's going to collect all the data and information from the existing agencies and create a intelligence sharing network which can be used by various agencies, and it functions under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So it's also a counter-terrorism measure that collects and collates a host of information from government databases including tax and bank account details, credit debit card transactions, visa and immigration records, and itineraries of rail and air travel. It will also have access to crime and criminal tracking network and systems, a database that links crime information, including first information reports or FIRs across 14,000 police stations in India. So this network of information is created so that a better analysis of the threat of terrorism activities can be done and better dealt with. So how was its establishment done? In the aftermath of the 26th terrorist attack in 2008, which exposed the deficiency that the security agencies had no mechanism to look for vital information on a real-time basis. So the need was felt for such intelligence network being robust, and that is why NatGrid was formed. And who will have access to NatGrid? So all this grid of intelligence information which is prepared, the premier organizations which require access to this network will be given the access, which the bodies are CBI, Directorate of Revenue Intelligence or DRI, or Enforcement Directorate, Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, Central Board of Direct Taxes, Cabinet Secretariat, Intelligence Bureau, Directorate General of GST Intelligence, Narcotics Control Bureau, Financial Intelligence Unit, and the National Investigation Agency or NIA. So these are the agencies which will be accessing the intelligence network of NatGrid. These were some of the important points that we need to take a note of with respect to this particular topic. With this, we come to end of today's discussion, and we'll meet on Monday with the important articles of the newspaper. Thank you.